Namaste, and thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this forum and share my thoughts on temples, something that I have studied for almost 2 decades now. Okay, so namaste. I'll talk a little bit about me at the beginning of the presentation. So I'm going to talk about temples and a classification of temples that I have come up based on my travels, based on my studying temples, and based on my interactions with a lot of smaller temples. But before that, let me just quickly walk you through what I do. So this is, in details, is my travel blog, which is India's probably only bilingual travel blog. And I've been writing it since 2004, so it's almost 18 years old. And we have more than 1,000 plus travel stories. We have the associated YouTube channel and the social media channels. I have my personal website called anuradhagoyal.com, where I have more than 700 books reviewed, and I'm in Limca Book of Records for that. I have a podcast called Detours, where I interact with people who have something very interesting to talk about, some aspect of India, mostly India. In the year 2019, I curated a conference to revive the Indic Yatra traditions, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them in the talk today. The way tourism industry is being promoted today is a very, very Western way of traveling, which is all about eat, drink, be merry, and just be, and just get lost. While our Indic traditions have a huge literature on yatras and how the yatra should be done and what we should achieve out of yatra. I'll touch upon it. That could be a topic in itself. So this is what I do. These are some of the books that I have authored. My first book was called Mouse Charmers. This was about business innovation. The second book, Lotus in the Stone, is about my journeys across sacred sites in India. And I'm going to quote a lot from this book today. Navratri is a book that I co-edited with Dr. Vivek Devroy, where we tried to document 16 different kshetras of India and how they celebrate Navratri, the common threads and the different manifestations of the same thread. Ayodhya Mahatmya, I'm again going to quote a lot from this book, is from Skanda Puran. I translated the Ayodhya Mahatmya from Skanda Puran, and I also studied Ayodhya by visiting it many times, along with Ayodhya Shodh Sansthan in Ayodhya. And we've kind of recreated the map of Ayodhya as it is described in Skanda Puran. Unusual Temples of India and Bharat Ke Anokhe Mandir are books about absolutely unique temples, some of which I'll touch upon today. Cave temples are some of the oldest temples we have found in India. Actually across the world, but we'll restrict the talk to India. So I'm going to talk about this book as well. All these books are available for anybody who's intrigued. So let me set the context of how did I reach the classification that I'm going to discuss today about temples. So I've been visiting various nooks and corners of India for almost 2 decades, actually all my life, but in last 2 decades, I have been writing about them and I've been photographing them. I've been taking videos of them. And all of it has been going on my blogs, my social media, my YouTube channel, and everything. So about 3-4 years back, I was going through the archives of my travels and I discovered that I have a lot of temple pictures which I have not shared or I have not written about because they were not these magnificent, grand temples that everybody talks about, or, where you have one look at the temple and you are in awe and you are transported to another space and time. These were all small temples, but they were all practicing temples. They were all temples where in the mornings and evenings, you'll see a lot of devotees coming and worshipping. These were all very Jagrat temples. Practicing is a very is a very operational term, but when you say Jagrit, you mean there is an energy flow that happens in these temples, which you can understand and feel when you stand there. So what I thought I will do is that uh, I will start putting these temple stories on my Instagram handle, in details Instagram handle. And I started writing about these little stories, capturing the basic tenets of a temple, which is where it is located, who's the presiding deity, the Adhishthatri or Adhishtatra Devata of the temple, the time period in which it is built, if it is known, and if we know about the builder who's built the temple. These were the 3 or 4 primary data points that I took. And if there is any speciality about that temple, any special features about that temple, I started putting them as Instagram posts. And as I started posting, I was inspired, and I took a personal sankalp of putting 108 temple stories. And I didn't know if I have 108 temple stories or not. So I said, if I don't have, I will go and I will visit 108 temples and I'll write about them. But to my utter surprise, I found that I had far more stories. So as of today, I have posted more than 250 temple stories, some of which have been contributed by other people. So when I was actively doing it, right now I'm on a break from this handle, but when I was actively posting, I also started receiving a lot of temple stories from different corners of the world. And different remote corners of India where the priests would send in their temple stories. And that was a fascinating thing. So this became a visual database of temples in India, big and small, known and unknown, common and obscure, all kinds of temples. So then I started looking at the data. Now with temples in front of me and the stories in front of me, a kind of pattern started emerging. A lot of patterns start emerging when you look at data. So this was a visual data that I was looking at, and a lot of temple patterns started emerging. And when I looked at those temples, what I realized is that all the big, grand, magnificent temples, they get a lot of focus because it's easy to take their pictures. They are managed by ASI. They are well documented and they are brilliant, to say the least. They are brilliant, simply. So they get a lot of focus, but a lot of them are not really practicing temples. The practicing temples are the small neighborhood temples, which nobody talks about. Even if people visit them regularly, maybe on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis, they don't talk about them. We simply don't talk about the neighborhood Hanuman temple or Durga temple, which we visit for festivals or for our personal sankalps. We don't talk about them, while those are far more important for our lives. So I said, let me look at reclassifying the temples and see if my classification works. So let's look at that. So from here, I'll begin talking about the classification that I have. Now, the typical temple classification happens based on these 4 or 5 features on the basis of period. When was it created? Is it, is it pre-10th century, it's 10th century, 12th century, 13th century, 14th century? This is how we period-wise classify temples. Then, of course, there's a geographical location saying that it's a South Indian temple, it's a North Indian temple, East Indian temple, or a particularly belonging to a certain area. It could be a Malwa temple, it could be a Hoysala temple, depending on the region. Then we have architectural styles. The 2 big architectural styles that we have is North Indian Nagara style and South Indian Dravidian style. But then there are many smaller versions of these, or sub-classifications of these temples, which are also a function of period and geographical location. I'll touch upon that in my first category. Then we have temples which we associate with some royal dynasties. So Cholas, Pallavas, Kalingas, Palas, Pratiharas, Gurjar Pratiharas, Rashtrakutas, Solankis, All these are royal dynasties that we associate with these temples, and we are extremely thankful to them that they left us such magnificent temples, which are a living history books, open air living history books for us today. Uh, the final classification that is sometimes done is on the basis of presiding deity. So we have Shaiva temples, we have Vaishnav temples, we have Shakti temples, we have Ganpati temples, we have Sun temples, we have Kartikeyan temples, and we have some other folk deities, Khandoba, we have Yellamma temples, we have a lot of small little deities, Karni Mata temple, and whole lot of tribal deities which are done. So based on the deities also sometimes we classify. So these are the typical temple classifications that are used by the scholars and the historians. Now what I have classified is, my first classification is royal temples. All the big magnificent temples that we see across the country, primarily in western and southern India, because they have managed to survive. In northern India, most temples have not survived, so we don't see many of them. We just see some examples in Khajuraho, we see some examples in Kumaon, in Jageshwar Dham, and some random temples that have managed to survive, some of them in Rajasthan, but not much has survived in North India. Thankfully, we have a lot to study in the southern Indian temples, especially royal temples, and in the eastern India in Odisha. So let me walk you through some of the temples and talk about this category of temples. So the temple on your left is Nataraja temple in Chidambaram, and our temple on your right is Brihadeshvara temple in Tanjore. Now, these are two Chola era temples, and beautiful, magnificent temples. You see these large gopurams, which are sometimes bigger than the temple shikhara. You see these magnificent rhythmic shikharas. The stone on top of the Brihadeshvara temple itself is a subject of study, because it weighs so much and nobody knows how it was taken on top of that shikhara. And there are, you can spend days talking about different aspects of these temples, but these are typical royal temples, grand temples. Now, what does this temple tell us? You look at the grandeur of these temples, just the richness of these temples, and you can easily infer the richness that the period would have, that period of history would have when these temples would have been built. So whatever we build is a function of the prosperity we have at that point in time. So when they were building such magnificent temples, you can extrapolate and think about the prosperity those people had, the techniques and tools they had, the amount of knowledge they had to mix and merge various disciplines, so how to get a stone to a place, to how to carve stories, which stories to carve, and how to tell stories in a way that they can be understood by a visitor. So these are a function of the prosperity of those times, and these are some of the most magnificent temples. Now, these are some of the oldest stone temples that are available to us. The temple on the left is Vaikuntha Peramul temple in Kanchipuram, and on the right is Kailasanatha temple, again in Kanchipuram. Both of them are royal temples built by the Pallavas. The reason I am showing you the picture on the left is how a temple becomes an open air history book. Now, if you see these pillars with a lion at their base, you know that this is a Pallava architecture. Pallavas had these typical pillars with these lion bases carved. The moment you see them, you can say it with reasonable level of certainty that this belongs to a Pallava period. Now, if you notice the third pillar and the fifth pillar, and some stones on top of the second and third pillar and fifth pillar, you'll notice a change in color. The earlier pillars are in typical sandstone color, and the third and the fifth pillar they look like a granite pillar. and the way the lion has been carved is slightly different. Artistically, it's a different pillar. The reason is that this temple is about 7th, 8th century temple, and it was later, 400, 500 years later, it was renovated or maintained by the Vijayanagara Empire. So the pillars that you see in the darker color are the ones which were restored by the Vijayanagara kings, while the pillars which are the sandstone pillars are the original pillars. So what does this tell us? At a very, very rudimentary level, it tells us that the kingdoms passed from one king to another king. The political scene changed, but the subsequent rulers maintained the temples. They would carry on the renovation work, and they would try to keep the styles intact as long as they can. I mean, there's a possibility that temple reaches a stage where you have to completely rebuild the temple, and there are agamas and shastras give us prescription, give us a complete process of rebuilding a temple if there is a need to rebuild the temple. Now, if you see the walls behind these pillars, they are profusely carved. So in this particular temple, on one side you have, it's a Vishnu temple. So on one side you have the whole story of Vishnu carved. On the other side, you have the story of the king who built the temple carved, which is kind of parallel to the story of the Vishnu. And then you have stories of common people. You have stories of traders. You have the images of temple styles. If you have seen Shore Temple in Mahabalipuram, which is not too far from Kanchipuram, you will see the temple styles carved here. So it was like an architecture book. It was like a history book. It was like a Vishnu Puran. It was like documenting everything that is in and around the temple, and which, if we know the language, we can still read it. If we know the Vishnu Puran, you can still go and read those stories. You can understand those stories. If you know about the Pallava dynasty, if you are an expert, you will find half of your evidences on the walls of this temple. You have traders, so you will see typical Arabs carved on the walls, indicating that we were trading with the Arabs. Or you have Chinese carved on the walls, be it this temple or Sun Temple, Konark. You have these carved, so you have the trade carved. Some places you find the things that are traded carved. There are flora and fauna which is carved. You'll typically see all the flowers that are available in the region, all the animals that are available in the region that are carved. So everything was carved. History need not be written in books in the form and served to you on a platter. History can be put out in this way as well. And this is a visual documentation. Anybody can read. Anybody who can see can read and understand and interpret it in their own way. These two pictures are from Hoysala temples. The reason I'm showing you these is that every dynasty and had their own architectural style, a signature architectural style, and a dynasty has a time and a space stamp, because a dynasty ruled in a certain region. It had its boundaries. And it ruled for a certain period. It could be 30, 40 years, it could be 300, 400, 600 years, but they ruled for a certain period of time. So when I say Hoysalas, it means a certain period of time and a certain region of the country which they ruled, and in that we find these architectural styles. So if you see the picture on the left, these latticed windows, jalidar windows that we see, is a typical marker of the Hoysala architecture. The picture on right is a beautifully carved pillar, which we find again in Hoysala temples. Probably the best carved pillar or the most finely carved pillars are found in this architectural style. A lot of people like to say that they are carved by aliens, or they were carved, or the other end says they were carved without using lathe machines, and how did they carve it? My sense is that they definitely had tools to carve with this delicacy and with this level of details and fineness, we probably lost the tools and we've lost the artisans who could carve like this. So, and for me, this is also an aspirational thing that someday we should reach a level. Today, with all the technology, all the tools that we have available, we can't carve something like this as fine and as refined. So, this is something that our ancestors have left for us to aspire to be. This is like the mark. This is like the benchmark of excellence that they have left for us to hopefully reach and hopefully cross. Uh, so so they were also, if you look at these pillars, you can look at the temple, you can look at the engineering, you can look at technology, you can look at mathematics, you can look at stories, you can look at aesthetics, you can look at history, and you can look at the sheer joy of, what the Hindi word or the Sanskrit word for that is rasa. The rasa that it gives you, the joy that it gives you when you look at it. And when you look at these temples, just think, can we create something like this? So from South India, let's move to Gujarat. So the temple on the left is Dhish Temple in Dwaraka, and temple on the right is the temple tank of Sun Temple at Modhera. Now these are the examples of the Solanki style of temples. In fact, the upcoming Sri Ram temple at Ayodhya is kind of modeled at the Dhish temple. So if you look at the model, you'll see glimpses of this temple there. Now, this is an example. Now, Dhish temple is not really a royal temple. It's a Tirtha. It's one of the Saptapuris. It's one of the Char Dhams. But this has been patronized by the kings who ruled from Dwaraka. So every king who's ruled from Dwaraka or who's ruled the region where Dwaraka falls, they have contributed to this temple continuously, and that's why this temple is so grand. Temple on the right is a typical Solanki architecture sun temple, one of the few sun temples, and again, one of the sun temples which is not practicing. Its Garbhagriha is absolutely empty, and a temple I hope in my lifetime becomes practicing, because all you have to do is do the Pran Pratishtha and the temple can be a working temple. It has a beautiful temple tank, an extremely symmetric temple tank, which adds to the aura of the temple. I'll come to the temple tanks a little later. These are two temples. The left temple is Vamana Murti temple in Cochin, and the right one is the famous Padmanabha Swami temple in Thiruvananthapuram. And you see a very local architect of Kerala, using slanting roofs because they get a lot of rains. And Padmanabha Swami, you can't take pictures inside, so you have to take it from the road. This is the best I could get, but this is the typical Keralan tech, and all of them are royal temples. Now, the temple on the left is called Shivdole. It's in a place called Shivasagar in Assam. It's very close to Jorhat in Assam. And this place, Shivasagar, used to be the capital of Ahom kings. If you've not heard of Ahom kings, then Ahom kings ruled that region for more than 600 years. They're probably one of the longest ruling dynasties in India. And Assam gets its names from Ahom. In fact, Assamese people call themselves Ahomiyas, not Assamese. And the name comes from Ahom. The Shivasagar has a lot of these temples. There is Shivdole, Vishnupur, Joy Dole, lot of huge temple tanks, which look far more natural than the stone temple tanks that we just saw in the last slide. If you look at this temple, this is also a royal temple, but this is a far, far simpler temple. It also has a stone base, and it's as Jagrita temple. It's still a practicing temple, a royal temple, but compared to the other temples that we saw, it's a relatively simple temple. And that is an indicator of the region. of what the region values, of what the kings value. It can also be an indicator of the prosperity of the region. Temple on the right is Jagannath Puri Temple in Puri. Again, this is one of the Char Dhams. It is the Annakshetra of Jagannath, and it's not a royal temple in the sense it's not owned or built by a royal dynasty, but it has been again patronized by anybody who's ruled the area of Jagannath Puri. So it has received constant patronage from the kings, whoever ruled. So in that sense, like Dwarkadhish temple, this temple also has the patronage, or the seva has been received by received from every king who has ruled. Okay, so the point that I'm trying to make cannot be said better than these two slides. The temple on the left is Kandariya Mahadev Temple in Khajuraho. One of the most beautiful temples, one of the most rhythmic temples. If you see it early morning, when the first rays of sun fall on it, it shimmers like sandalwood, and it can resonate within you if you are sensitive enough. Its rhythm is beautiful. The symmetry, the geometry of this temple is exemplary. And this is a 10th century temple built by the Chandelas, and it's a part of a larger temple complex. There are many temples around it, but I find this the most beautiful temple here. So 10th century Royal Temple was lost for a long time till it was discovered back during the British era. And then it is now a very popular temple complex. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most visited tourist destinations in India. The temple on the right is Mohineshwara Temple, banged in the middle of Gulmarg, which was originally called Gaurimarg. And this is a small temple. It is also a royal temple. It was built about 100 years ago by the then king of Kashmir. And we all know the condition of the Kashmir kings about 100 years ago, and the kind of resources they had and the kind of influence they had about 100 years ago in this region called Kashmir. So you see the impact of that on the temple. It's smaller than a village temple that you will see. It's simply 4 pillars and a shivling inside, and this conical roof on top. Thankfully, it's a practicing temple. Anybody can visit it. You can stand there. If you see there is an iron gate and you can see through it. If it's open, you can step inside. If it's not open, you can do the darshan from outside. It's a royal temple. So temples are a marker of the prosperity of the builders, of the times they were built in, of the people they were built by. But what is also important is that irrespective of the times, irrespective of what the situation was, every royal kings engaged themselves in making temples. Whatever they could afford, whatever they could do, they did build temples during their time, which is the most important thing, because once you built it, if the conditions are favorable, your next generations can potentially build on top of it and expand it and make it big and grand. And a lot of grand temples that we see may have started as smaller temples and then grown into these bigger temples. These are also 2 royal temples. The left is Shamrai Temple from Vishnupur in West Bengal. And the one on right is Hidimba Devi Temple in Dungri Hills near Manali in Himachal Pradesh. So these 2 temples tell us about the material that is used, the material that was locally available. So if you know Bengal, there's not much of stone available, though there are stone temples for which stone may have been transported from somewhere. But this is an innovation which was done by medieval kings, Malla kings, who ruled 500, 600 years ago. So they built these temples and then they pasted these clay tablets, terracotta tablets, full of stories of Vishnu. They were Vaishnavas. So most of these temples are Vishnu temples, Krishna temples to be precise. And the region is also famous for Balucheri sarees. So you see the same patterns and same stories on the sarees of Balucheri and on the walls of these temples. These temples follow all the agamic requirements of a temple, in the sense they have their shikharas, they have Pancharatna temples, Navaratna temples, all the architectural style, all the storytelling on the walls and everything, but the material used is very, very different. On the right, Hidimba Devi temple uses the typical hill architecture, which is called Kathpuni, where alternate layers of stone and wood are used, and the slanting roofs are there to take care of the immense snowfall that they get. Both of these are royal temples patronized by the kings. Now we've seen the stone sculpture material. The temples were also the placeholders for all kinds of arts. The picture on the left is Nataraja from the walls of Brihadeshvara temple in Tanjore. And picture on the right is Ram Darbar painted on the ceiling of a small temple called Gopinath Temple in a small town called Navalgarh in Rajasthan, in the Shekhawati region of Rajasthan. Now, Tanjore temple, we know it belongs to the very, very prosperous times of Cholas. The Ram Darbar on the right, which also shows Shiva praying to the Ram Darbar, belongs to a place which is famous for beautiful painted havelis. So you see these profusely painted havelis of extremely wealthy business community, which then prospered in places like Calcutta and Mumbai. But the best paintings you see are on the walls of the temples, and the best preserved ones, because temples, havelis have fallen out of use, so that everything has gone. But temples always remain in practice. Temples are always preserved and maintained by the common devotee who continues to visit the temple. This painting on the left is from Guruvayur temple. Painting on the right is from a temple in Orcha in Madhya Pradesh. Now, the reason I am showing you these paintings from different parts of the country is that you will see an extremely wide range of painting styles. Everything is different. The color palettes are different. The way the strokes are made are different. The way the stories are told are different. But if you look at the stories don't change. You still see the same stories. So somebody who is visiting Orcha from any part of the country can see that this is the picture of a Sheshashahi Vishnu. So these stories are the ones which bind all the temples and all the sacred spaces in India together. And this is a theme that I talk about in detail in my book, Lotus in the Stone, how these stories bind us together. So with this, I'll come to the end of royal temples. I'll quickly move to Tirtha Sthalas. Now, Tirtha Sthalas are the most important sacred spaces we have on the map of India. Probably the world over, they have sacred spaces, but we're going to restrict ourselves to Tirtha Sthalas. Now, what is a Tirtha Sthala? So, picture on the left is Kashi Vishwanath Temple in Kashi, and on the right is Kamakhya Temple in Neelanchal Hills near Guwahati in Assam. Kashi Vishwanath, as we know, is one of the Dwadash Jyotirlings, and Kamakhya is one of the Shakti Peeths. Depending on which text you follow, you can think of 51 Shakti Peeths or 108 Shakti Peeths, or if you follow Adi Shankaracharya, then 18 Shakti Peeths, but Kamakhya is always a part of those lists. So if you create a map of all the 12 Jyotirlings, or all the Shakti Peeths, or all the Vishnu Dhams, you will pretty much be covering the whole of India. And but what is a Tirtha? I want you to ponder a little bit on what is a Tirtha. So the picture on left is Omkareshwar Jyotirling on the banks of Narmada in Madhya Pradesh, and picture on right is Nageshwar Jyotirling in Kumaon Hills near Almora in Uttarakhand. Both of these are Jyotirlings. The most important point at a Tirtha is its Tirtha means Jal. It has multiple meanings, many meanings. We can do another talk on Tirthas themselves. But Tirthalas are always located close to a water body. It could be a flowing river, it could be ocean, it could be a tank, it could be a pond, it could be a lake, it could be a natural lake or a man-made lake. But it was always next to a water body, and in fact, the water body is the real Tirtha. So if you go to Braj Kshetra, the biggest Tirtha is not any of the temples but Yamuna, or Braj ki Raj, as they say. Or if you go to Kashi, or if you go to Prayag, in Prayag, the place where the three rivers meet is the most important Tirtha. Everything else has come out. It's like a byproduct of that Tirtha, which has come up because a lot of people come up, because a lot of people come. So they over a period of time, different people, different saints, different avatars have created a lot of stuff around that. But the most important Tirtha is the water body itself, where the two rivers meet or three rivers meet. And in fact, wherever two or three rivers meet, it's a Tirtha. So there are a lot of types of Tirtha. I'll touch upon that towards the end of this, but let's go. So this is a Manibandha Shakti Peeth on the left, and on the right is the Kaleram temple from Ayodhya. And it is said that this was the original Vigrahas which were there in the Ram Janmabhoomi temple. Now it's located in another temple, and there's a huge story which I've written about on my blog. Then there are Tirthas like Naimisharanya. So the picture on the left is Chakra Tirth at Naimisharanya. If you've not heard of the word Naimisharanya, then pick up any Puran. The place where our rishis are sitting and talking about all the Shrutis and Smritis is called Naimisharanya, the forests of Naimisharanya. And this is the most important Tirth. In fact, there are 4 Tirthas that they say which belong to the 4 different yugas. So Naimisharanya belongs to the Satyug, Pushkar belongs to Treta Yug, Kurukshetra belongs to Dwapar Yug, and Ganga belongs to Kali Yug, our current Yug. So Ganga becomes the most important Tirth for us. So Pushkar is another Tirth which is located around the Pushkar lake. You can read about it in detail. So these are some of the Tirthas, and then there are different types of Tirthas. I'll do a talk on Tirthas sometimes. There are Manas Tirthas, so your Satya, Kshama, Sanyam, these all come under Manas Tirth. Then there are Prapta Tirths, the Tirths which are easily reachable, Tirths which are not so easily reachable. There are Nitya Tirth, places which are a Tirtha at any point in time. Then there are Guru Tirth or Sant Tirth as they call, and so on and so forth. There's quite a lot of Tirthas themselves. And the reason I'll talk a lot about Tirthas is that they define the Indian way of travel, tourism, yatras. And that's why we need to look at them very, very critically. And the next category of temples is our Kula Devata temples, or our community and ancestor temples. Now, each one of us, at least the ones who are born in India, have a Kula Devata. And if you don't know your Kula Devata is typically the Devata you visit after, let's say, a wedding in the family. You go with your, spouse, your wife to your Kula Devata. Your Mundan ceremonies typically happen at your Kula Devata or your Kul Devi temples. Everybody has it. You may know or not know those temples. Let's look at some of the Kul Devata temples. The temple on the left is Mangeshi Mahadev temple in Goa. And this temple belongs to God Saraswat Brahmin community. Now, this is a Brahmin community, so this is a Brahmin temple. And within Brahmins also, only God Saraswat Brahmins. Now, this is a public temple. Anybody can visit it, but till a point. But beyond that point, inside the Garbhagriha, only people belonging to this community are allowed, because this is a community temple. A community temple means the community has the first right on that temple, and everybody else may or may not be allowed by the community. It's their choice. There is a popular story that I narrate many a times. Let me quickly tell that story. So I once met a Dalit speaker who was, very proudly talking about in at an event about the fact that the Brahmins don't allow them in their temples, and and he was trying to gain a lot of sympathy by saying that Brahmins don't allow us in their temples. So I got up to him and he said, "Do you allow Brahmins in your temples?" So he'd probably never been asked that question. So he thought for 2-3 minutes and he said, "But why would they come to our temples?" So I said, "They may be thinking the same. Why should you go to their temples?" The reason this story is important is that today in independent India, we think all temples are public property. They're like, cinema halls or party halls where anybody can go. No, not all temples were public property. A lot of temples belong to certain communities. In Goa itself, I've seen Kshatriya temples, I have seen Brahmin temples, and I have seen Kayasth temples in places like Delhi, which belong to the community where the deities of that community are worshipped, which may or may not be, Devi or Vishnu or Shiva. They could be any deity, and they have their own rules to follow. They have their own festivals. They have their own calendar of annual events. They have everything defined by them, and these temples are used for a lot of those community events. So the Upanayan ceremonies, all the sanskars that are done by those community members in these temples. The temple on the right is Karnataka Temple. Now, this is a great example of how some of our illustrious ancestors become our devatas. Karni Mata is a real woman who lived 600-700 years ago in a place called Deshnok near Bikaner in Rajasthan. And she did some extremely courageous acts which saved the community, and because of which the community continues to live today. When we hear about them after hundreds of years, they look almost like miracles, but they are examples of extreme courage, because of which the community was saved and the community started treating her as Devi. Today, she is their Kul Devi of the Charan community. This temple is also known as Rat Temple because rats are worshipped here, but that's another story. These are examples of community Kuladevta temples of certain communities, and each community, irrespective of which community you belong to, there will be a Kuladevta. If you don't know them, please go and find out. The temple on the left again is from Rajasthan in Jhunjhunu. It's called Dadi Sati Temple. Now, this is one of the most beautiful, biggest, best maintained temple that I have seen in North India. And this temple is again dedicated to a lady in the family who is called Sati, but the Sati here does not mean that she simply gave up her life when her husband passed away. But Sati means that she did something courageous which saved the community, which saved the family. And these are well documented stories of these women. So you will know that this woman was born in this family, in this village, to these parents, and then she was married to this man in this village, in this community. And then, so for example, somebody was traveling somewhere, somebody attacked the husband and she saved the husband or she saved the kids. And because of her saving, because of her courage, the lineage continues. So, and the temples are dedicated to these, and they're called Dadi. Dadi means grandmother, but it could be grandmother few generations ago, and people here have immense faith in them. For them, they are the Shaktis, they are the real Devis who appeared in their own lineage at some point in time, their own lineage. So they are treated as the Shaktis, as the Devis, as the Kula Devis. Temple on the right is in Kolhapur, Panchganga River. These are memorial temples of the royal families. So this is another way uh, uh, of commemorating the people who have gone away. I've seen these in Baroda as well. Now, temple on the left is Ranakpur Jain Temple, one of the most beautiful temples in marble. In fact, a lot of popular narrative tries to tell us that Taj Mahal is the most beautiful monument in marble, and probably some monument in Agra was the first monument to be built. Some monument to be built in Agra by the Mughals, but this predates all of that, and the level of carvings is beyond imagination. The number of stories and the number of pillars, you cannot count the number of pillars. There are more than 1,400 pillars in this temple. The temple on the right is Lama Yuru Monastery in Ladakh, and this is a typical hill monastery in a Buddhist monastery. So Jain temples, Buddhist temples would also be community temples, which belongs to community. The first rite of worship is by the community. There could be sub-communities also. For example, Jains have Digambar Jain, Shwetambar Jain. Buddhists have Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. So whoever the monastery or the temple belongs to, they have the first right. The third category is Gram Devta or Kshetra Devta. And these are the most ignored temples that we have, but the most important temples for us personally. This temple on the left is a Jyotiba temple in Maharashtra. It is dedicated to Dattatreya Avatar, who's also called Jyotiba, and it has a very interesting celebratory way of that is used in the temple. You see gulal. So when you walk to the temple, there are gulal shops all around. Inside the temple, gulal is offered. People offer gulal to each other, and you see this bright pink color everywhere. Temple on the right is Bala Tripura Sundari temple in a village called Kuchipudi. Now we know that Kuchipudi is one of the 7 classical dances from India, but not many of us know that the name Kuchipudi comes from this village called Kuchipudi in Andhra Pradesh. If you see the Nataraja on top of the Shikhara, which is very unusual to see a metal Nataraja on top of a stone temple, you know that this village is all around dance. Now, Bala Tripura Sundari is a Devi who is the deity of performing arts, and she is the Gram Devi of this temple. So, Bala Tripura Sundari is the presiding deity of performing artists, and this village is all about Kuchipudi dance. Everybody in this village is engaged in Kuchipudi dance, whether they are dancers, whether they are musicians, whether they are jewelry makers, costume makers, musicians, singers, but everybody is involved in that. So it's very natural that their Gram Devi is somebody who is the presiding deity of performing arts. The picture on the left is Panchamukhi Hanuman in the bang in the middle of Zaveri Bazaar in Mumbai. Not many people have visited this temple, but this is also a Kshetra Devata. Then temple on the right is the Narmada Devi temple in Maheshwar. Now you will see rivers personified as Devis. You'll see a lot of Gangamma temples, Ganga Devi temples, Yamuna temples, Kaveri Amma temples, all along the regions that they nurture. Wherever they nurture the region, their temples are built. So they are also the Kshetra Devata. Basically, Devatas are the people who nurture us, who are important for our well-being. So it could be Surya Dev, Chandra Dev, Ganga Devi, Narmada Devi. Whoever is nurturing you is the most important for you. Now, the reason I want to talk about Kshetra Devatas is that not many of us know our Kshetra Devatas. If you don't know who's your Kshetra Devata, an ancient Kshetra Devata, your temple closest to your home, wherever you live, is your Kshetra Devata. That's a thumb rule. It's not 100% true all the time, but it's a thumb rule. And that temple is the most important temple for you. The temple which is well known, has stories and everything is important. But for you, the most important temple is the temple which is closest to you, because its energy influences you on a day-to-day basis. And you influence the energy of that temple on a day-to-day basis. Then there are forest and cave temples. These are the two oldest known cave temples. Left one is Varaha Devi taking out the Bhudevi from the ocean. It's in the Udaygiri hills in near Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh. And temple on the right is one of the caves in Badami caves in northern Karnataka, and one of the most beautiful and most oldest known cave systems. So now cave temples are the oldest temples. Caves are the oldest forms of dwellings. They are the first dwellings that human being had, and that's why for the gods also, the first dwellings were caves. So there are rock-cut caves which are found across the geography of India. There are natural caves like Bhimbetka, which are found in certain parts of India, a lot of it in central India. But these are excavated caves. Now, the oldest excavated caves are 3rd century BC, called Barabar caves in Bihar. But then they're not as beautifully carved as these are. The cave on the left is Mahabalipuram. It's a small cave near the Tiger Cave in Mahabalipuram. And you can see how they were carving the stones. So wherever the stone is naturally lying, they would carve out the stories on that stone there and then. The cave on the right is Goa Gaja Cave in Bali in Indonesia. Now this cave is wonderfully carved on the outside, but inside it's absolutely plain. So you walk inside the cave. On the right side you walk, there is a Ganesh Murti, and on the left side you walk, there is a Shivaling. So you go there, you pray to them, and you come out. But the carving is only on the outside, not inside. Unlike Indian caves, where there's a lot of carving inside. These are two forest temples. I clicked them at Tirtha National Park in Odisha, and but I have found such temples across the jungles in India. They're typically called Bankhandi Mahadev, Vanashankari Devi, Vanadurga, Arya Durga, something to do with forests. So these are the deities, typically Shiva and Shakti temples. And small temples, they don't come in the way of the forest. You will find sometimes they're just below a tree. Sometimes the small temples are built, and temple on the right, you can see it must be a very, very old temple, and some carved stones which must have been lying around have been carved, while the temple on the left is a miniature version of a Kalingan temple, a Shiva temple. But you will find them everywhere. Whichever jungle you go to, you will find them inside the jungles. I have spoken a lot about cave temples in this book, so if it interests you, you can pick it up. Then temples as instruments. Temples were also built precisely with respect to the motions of the Navagrahas. And Navagrahas are the grahas that are visible to the human eye. So you can see Sun, Moon, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn. These are the planets you can see with naked eye, or at least they could see it when their eyesight was much better than our eyesight and their skies were much more clearer. Even today, if you go to Himalayas on a starry night, you can see the stars far more than what you can see in a big city. So our temples were also built in alignment with those celestial bodies and in alignment with the movement. So temple on the left is Vidyashankara Temple in Sringeri in Karnataka. Now this has 12 pillars inside this mandapa, which belong to the 12 zodiac signs, starting from Aries, Taurus, and going all the way up to Pisces. And it is said that when sun is passing through a certain zodiac, like right now, it is passing through. Taurus, I think. So it is the first rays of the sun fall on that pillar. So based on which constellation the sun is passing through, the same pillar gets the first rays of the sun. So it to me is a great knowledge of mapping the skies on earth. The temple on the right is Kopeshwar Mahadev Temple in near Kolhapur in Maharashtra. Now, this is one of the rare open-to-sky architectures, and on Kartik Purnima, which comes 15 days after Diwali, the moon comes on top of this temple, and it lights up this mandapa. So a lot of these temple alignments, so they were instruments. Temples were also built as water management resources. So most temple tanks you would see are far bigger than the temples themselves. And they had the capacity to temple rituals. No, they were meant for capturing every drop of water, because we valued water. Without water you can't survive. But the temples were also a place where the water was collected and stored in the temple tanks like this. Across the country, if you can look at the original constructions of the temples, every temple had a temple tank, and it was a natural rainwater collection system. It was a natural groundwater recharge system. It was a natural place, because it was associated with temple. People would not dirty the water. They would not throw anything that would pollute the water. So a sanctity of the water was maintained. Picture on the right is Sun Temple, Konark, and these. I'll not get into the details. We all know that these wheels can be used to measure time, and there are a lot of measuring instruments built into this temple. Temple on the left is Kolhapur Mahalakshmi Temple. Again, 3 days in the year you have Kiranotsav, when the rays of the sun fall on the deity. If you have seen this temple, the Garbhagriha is deep inside. There is no way sun rays can reach there. 3 days in a year they do, and they do precisely how the builders of the temple wanted it to be. So that's another engineering marvel. Temples on the right are at a place called Burhanpur on the banks of Tapti River, and these are water markers. So if you see, each temple is built at a different level and is painted in different color. There's a reason for it. If the water reaches the red temple, in good old days, that meant that if in Burhanpur the water is touching this Shivaling, that means tomorrow there will be floods in Surat. So a messenger would be sent to warn people in Surat to do their disaster management. The water is coming. So that temples they look like temples. They look like just another temple with another Shivling, but they had a practical purpose to putting where they were put, and the size that they were made of, the color, the everything. There is a similar story. There are many similar stories that I have written about in a chapter called Engineering Marvels in my book Lotus in the Stone. This is one of those examples. Then our temples were also our records. They were our data management system, and these were those Bahi khatas maintained by the priests, where every detail of your family tree, your family lineage, every death, every birth, every wedding was recorded on a regular basis. So they were also our data management system, or our data servers, which we have kind of lost. Then there are recreated temples. I will not get into the details because we are running out of time. But there are temples which we recreate. For example, this Kalika Devi temple in Patiala in Punjab was brought from Kolkata by the then king about 100 years ago, and she was set up uh, in Patiala because the king believed in her, and she continues to be the presiding deity of that family and that region. Temple on the right, it looks like it's Ranganath temple in Vrindavan in UP. It looks like a typical South Indian temple. It is a South Indian style temple, but it is in Vrindavan. So somebody has created a Ranganathji temple. Ranganathji is how Krishna is known, or Vishnu is known in certain parts of South India, and somebody's recreated it in Vrindavan. You will see it in Pushkar, you will see it in many other places in North India. The Murti on the left is bang in the middle of the business district called Racha Prasong in Bangkok in Thailand. So and there are many Hindu temples in this region. If you take a walk, about a kilometer long walk, you will see a Shiva temple, a Ganesh temple, a Indra temple, a Lakshmi temple. This is of course Uma temple. So a lot of these temples are recreated. Temple on the right is Saraswati temple in Bali, one of the most beautiful Saraswati temples I have seen. It's built in the form of a lotus and lovely temple. So we'll move to Yatra temples. There are temples which commemorate the Yatras of Mahapurush. So I'll just quickly take this example of Panchkroshi Yatra, which goes around Kashi Khand in Varanasi. And the temple on the left is a temple that commemorates the visit of Ram, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrughan on Panchkroshi Yatra. So it commemorates the fact that the yatra that you are doing was also done by the four brothers from Ayodhya. Temple on the right shows the 5 Pandavas and Draupadi, and this commemorates the doing of this yatra by Pandavas. In fact, Pandava footprints you find across India. I have a complete chapter dedicated to the footprints of Pandavas in India in lotus and stone. But I wanted you to know that there are temples which commemorate these yatras done by people. It tells the current day devotee or yatri that what you are doing today was done by Sri Ram also. So you're following his footsteps. These are frozen moments. So there are temples which celebrate the deity, but there are temples which celebrate some points in time in a story. Temple on left is called Pandav Doot Temple. It celebrates the moment when it's dedicated to Krishna because he was the Pandav Doot in Mahabharata. But it doesn't celebrate Krishna as a deity, as a god. It celebrates him as the messenger of Pandavas as he visited Hastinapur one last time to make an effort to stop the war. The temple on right is Daksheshwar Mahadev temple in Kankhal in Haridwar, and it commemorates the moment when Sati immolated herself. And that is where all the stories related to Shiva and Shakti eventually lead to the event, the big event when Sati immolated herself in the Yagna Kund, which her father had set up for a huge yagna and didn't invite her husband. So this temple celebrates that. The temple on the left is Thakur Haridevji Maharaj temple. And this temple is supposed to be the place where Krishna stood when he held the Govardhan Parvat on his little finger. And this comes on the Parikrama Path of Govardhan Hill. I've written about it in detail, but it goes on to say that these are moments in time that are celebrated. The temple on the right is Kanak Bhavan in Ayodhya, which celebrates the arrival of Sita in Ayodhya. So this temple is believed to be the temple which Kaikai gifted to Sita in Muh Dikhai, or as a wedding gift. And this temple has, at least the plaque on the temple says that it has existed since then in some form and shape. And last it was renovated by the Queen of Orcha about 300 years ago. And so this commemorates the moment when Sita entered Ayodhya. Then there are many ashrams which have now become huge temples. The temple on the left is Ram Tirth in Amritsar, which is believed to be the Valmiki Ashram. Now I know Valmiki Ashram is in many places. It is in Bittur on the banks of Ganga in UP. There is even one supposed to be there in Kerala and in multiple places, but this is one of them. The temple on the right is Baba Neem Karoli's Hanuman temple, and his ashram has become a huge temple now with a following across the world. And the temple on the left is from Hawaii, a temple in Hawaii, which is built in stone. And the temple on the right is Auroville in Pondicherry. The reason I'm showing you these four is that there are ancient ashrams which have become temples. There are ashrams which have become temples in our lifetimes. Baba Neem Karoli lived not too long ago. Then there are temples outside India which are being built, and there are these new age world communes like Auroville which are coming up and building their own temples. Every temple is unique. We've covered a lot of these unique temples in these two books. Now the final question that I'm going to answer is which temples to visit. Now I have walked you through about 100 odd temples in these slides. Now the question that I am continuously asked is which temple should I visit? I can't visit all the temples, and right, even when I study temples, there is no way I can visit all the temples, even in a city or a state, forget about the country or the world. So which temples should you visit? Here is a simple grid that helps you. The most important temple is the temple at your home, because you worship it every day. You worship there every day, and the energy there impacts you every day, and it impacts you completely. Then you should visit the temples of your Ishta Devata. Now, Ishta Devata is a very personal Devata, the Devata you connect with the most, the Devata that is closest to your heart. It has nothing to do with any other rule. Anybody who appeals to you, it could be Krishna, if it's Vishnu, it could be Krishna, it could be Shri Ram, it could be Narasimha, it could be anything. It could be Hanuman, it could be anybody. So whoever is your Ishta Devata, visit his or her temple. Then you should visit Kul Devata temple, because that is your lineage, that's your inheritance, and that is what you inherit from your family. That's your DNA, that's your family lineage, and it's your responsibility to carry that lineage forward. Take it from your previous generations and pass it on to your next generation. So Kul Devata. Then your Kshetra Devata. Kshetra Devatas are very important, because after your Gharka temple, it's the Kshetra temple that impacts you a lot. And that's the one you can connect very easily, because it's a temple close to you. And some of the Kshetra Devatas, which have been practicing for a very long time, are very powerful. After all this, you can visit Tirthalas. Now if you connect with Shiva, you can visit Jyotirlingas. If you connect with Devi, you can visit Shaktipeeths, and so on and so forth. If you are connect with Ganpati, then you can do Ashtavinayak. There's a lot of literature available, a lot of data available on these. So visit Tirthalas, and then if you have time, then visit any other temples. One of the techniques I follow is that wherever I visit, whichever place I visit, I try to visit the Kshetra Devata of that temple. So if you are visiting Kashi, then visiting Kashi Vishwanath is visiting the Kshetra Devata. If you are visiting Puri, if you are in that region of Kalinga, then visiting Jagannath Puri or Lingaraj is visiting the Kshetra Devata. Whoever is the Kshetra Devata, it's like visiting the elderly in the house. So if you're visiting a region, then you can visit the Kshetra Devatas. So this is a template that you can use to decide which temples to visit and which temples you can potentially let go. And with that, I'll open myself to if any questions, if there are any, and this is the place to.
Anuradha ji, I just wanted to make a point that you mentioned about the Hidimba temple in Kulu, Himachal Pradesh. It's not a question; it's just an observation and a point that I want to make, that there is a similar such temple, and but unfortunately, because of various reasons, this temple is in ruins now in Nagaland. There is a village called Chumukedima. It is around 25-30 kilometers from the Nagaland state capital of Kohima. And there is this Hidimba temple in Chumukedima. And the Swayamsevaks of the Akhil Bharatiya Vanavasi Kalyan Ashram, they recently went on a visit from this, like after having a darshan in this temple. And they went to the Hidimba temple in Kulu, Himachal Pradesh. So because there is a connection, and because Hidimba has a connection with Mahabharata, and मतलब उसमें नागालैंड का भी संदर्भ आता है कई बार. So I just wanted to make this point that if you find time, like when you are on a tour of the northeast, so you must definitely visit. मतलब वो बाहर से अभी मंदिर जैसा भी नहीं लगता है. There are hardly 21 families of Angami Nagas who have been playing an important role in preserving this temple. Otherwise, we know the current demographic composition of Nagaland, and what has happened to whatever that has happened to the Hindu religious places of worship there. But मतलब ये connection है एक नॉर्थ ईस्ट के साथ. So I would like to request you, since you
I would definitely love to visit it as and when it happens. But if you know somebody there, so what I'm doing now is that I'm requesting all the youngsters. In fact, I have an internship program where if anybody wants to do an internship with us, they can come, and we generally guide them into writing. So if you know some people in Nagaland who can write about this temple, we'll be happy to publish it. And what happens is that once you document it, it's like a suraksha kavach. It is very difficult to destroy things which are well documented, and even if they are destroyed, it's easy to rebuild them once it's documented.
Yes,
so what I'm requesting everybody, anybody who's listening to this, is that if you know of these temples, please write to us with all the details. Please go and take pictures, videos, get all the details. I'll give you the template to capture all the information, and we'll publish it with due credits to whoever has submitted, and so that you kind of put it on record. So it becomes very difficult to destroy that.
True. Yes. And since you also mentioned about the Shivdole in Sibsagar district of Upper Assam, so not very far from that place, I have myself been to that place, that village. The name of that village is Hasora Adorkho Naga village. So there are around 300 families. The time I visited, it was in 2017. There are around 300 Konyak Naga families in that village, and they are still adherents of the Vaishnava Nam Dharma Parampara of Mahapurush Srimanta Shankardev. They have not embraced Christianity till now, and they have still preserved and maintained the Sanatan Dharmic traditions. So, and they also have their own temple. It's called Namghar in Assamese. So it's beautiful. You
visited Shankardev ashrams in Majuli.
Yes, there are hotras. We call them hotras. Monasteries. Yes.
No, don't call them monasteries. They are chatras.
They are satras. yeah, right? True.
So, there is a lot of work to be done. I'm doing what I can do as one person. But please join hands. I mean, I'll be happy to explore any possibility of doing it with Indus University. And let's document all of them. That's the least we can do.